I grew up in Chicago in the 60s, and I come from a family. I have an older sister, an older brother, and my mother and father. Your family always is important to what you achieve, and I was very lucky because my parents and they supported me in lots of things. They supported all their children in things that they did and what they were interested in and interested in accomplishing. Well, like I said, I think you get support and motivation, support from a lot of different people. I don't have anyone that I can particularly look up to and say, this person was a role model for me, or this person I tried to emulate. It was more that you can pick and choose from different people. They don't have to be, it doesn't have to be a woman, it doesn't have to be a black person, it doesn't have to be someone who's in engineering or science, or it doesn't have to be someone who's in law if you're in law. All it has to be is someone who has some particular skills or talents that they use. It could be someone who does things against odds, or it could be someone who does things with just great dignity or poise. So there have been people who I've been very impressed with, peers of mine, people that I've never met, that I've heard about. So you can get inspiration from lots of different sources. I don't think people say you set goals, and I don't really see myself as having set goals particularly and said by such and such an age I'm going to be doing X, Y, Z. I think I've more spent time doing things that I've enjoyed, and I think that's important in life. It's not to just live your life by a set of standards that are imposed from outside, but rather to live your life by your own terms. I've really made my life into things that I enjoy. After all, it's my life. That's all I have. And so I have to enjoy it. I think that there are very few people in the world who knew exactly what they wanted to do when they, started off at 2 years old or 5 years old. I did always have an interest in science and wanted to be involved with something that had to do with science, but wasn't necessarily being a physician. It wasn't necessarily being an astronaut. In fact, I didn't make the decision that I would definitely go to medical school until I was a junior in college. So it works a little bit differently. I went to undergraduate school at Stanford University and majored in chemical engineering and African Afro-American studies. And I went to medical school at Cornell University. And the medical school is in New York City, so I spent 4 years in New York City, which was great. I worked with the Peace Corps as a staff physician who took care of Peace Corps volunteers from 1983 to 1985 in Sierra Leone in West Africa. And the experience was really interesting. I had been overseas before and worked in developing countries, and I found that you learned a lot about yourself and about the world around you just by spending time outside of the United States. So I wanted to repeat that experience. It was really exciting. I enjoyed it quite a bit. Learned a lot of medicine, learned a lot about people, learned a lot about the world. Oh, applying to NASA actually is quite simple. I called up and said, I'm interested in the astronaut program. Would you send me an application? It's basically that simple. I had a friend who had worked with NASA for a while, who I knew from college. And my friend named Sam Denard had always encouraged me to apply to the astronaut program. So I did apply with his encouragement. You do all kinds of training. It's not boot camp. Something I should really make very clear. NASA is a civilian organization. It's a civilian government organization. It's not a military organization. I've never been in the military, have no military affiliation. There are astronauts who are active duty military on loan to NASA, and I think a lot of people, think of the astronaut office in that vein, but it's not that way. In terms of physical training, some of the tasks that we do are physical in the sense of the EVAs, which are spacewalks or extravehicular activity. We spend time underwater in a spacesuit, and it's physically demanding. So in that sense, there's physical training, but in terms of physical conditioning, no, it's up to you to stay in shape. You know that how often you fly, you know that your flight status depends on you passing a physical every year, so it behooves you to stay in good condition. There are two types of astronauts. They're pilots and they're mission specialists. Pilots are the ones who basically are responsible for taking the shuttle up and bringing it back down. And Fred Gregory is a pilot and Charlie Bolden is a pilot. And mission specialists are basically responsible for doing the experimentation on orbit, for doing the spacewalks, and also for doing the deployment of satellites or payloads or any of the cargo that you bring aboard the shuttle. And I'm a mission specialist, and that's my responsibility. People have also sort of referred to the mission specialists as a scientist astronauts because we're also chosen because of our background in science. The mission specialists are responsible for any of the experiments that are done on orbit, and also the spacewalks and any of the payload or the cargoes that we deploy. Skylab was a project that occurred in the early 70s, and it was actually the very first space station in the world. It was there before Mir, before the Soviets had a space station. And it was had 3 different crews that went for incremental time periods, I think starting with about 30 days, 60 days, and a little over 80 days was the last crew. And they spent time doing experiments up in space, seeing the effects of weightlessness on humans. Now, NASA is presently in the process of developing a space station that hopefully will be functional and able to be, people live on it by 1996. And space station will basically be a platform for people to do experimentations on orbit, to have a long exposure to zero gravity, not only for humans, but also for material sciences, processing, for studying the effects of weightlessness on different systems. The importance of having a space station is basically so that you have that opportunity to have people in space for a long period of time. It also gives you the ability to look down on Earth and serve as a platform for studying the Earth. You can study things like geology and weather, oceanography from looking back down at the Earth from space. You also have the opportunity to study things like pollution. You can turn your cameras or your attention outward and study the stars and the universe from a better vantage point. The other thing is, if we're ever going to Mars or going to build a lunar base, you need to know what happens to people when they're in a low gravity environment for a long period of time. So space station will also give us that kind of opportunity. I am not assigned to working on space station now. The astronaut office does have a number of individuals who are assigned to follow space station along and help in its development. I am not assigned there. My present assignment is working at Kennedy Space Center in Florida. What I do at Kennedy Space Center in Florida is to help with the launches. Now, I act basically as a liaison with the for the astronaut office, with the people at Kennedy who process the shuttle for launch. They also help to process and ready any of the payloads or satellites or experiments that are going to be launched on the shuttle. Dr. Irene Long is the director of the occupational health area at Kennedy Space Center. And she's a very interesting person. She actually was the first of 2 people who graduated from the aerospace medicine residency program that was sponsored by NASA. And she has spent, I think, about 6 or 7 years now at NASA at Kennedy Space Center, and does work on helping to figure out, how to take care of employees who work at Kennedy Space Center, who work with the launches, who are exposed to lots of hazardous materials. She's a good friend of mine. We've spent some time together, and it comes from me working down at Kennedy. We also had a very interesting experience. One Labor Day weekend, I was working down at Kennedy Space Center and found out that Nichelle Nichols, who was Lieutenant Uhura in Star Trek, was going to be at a Star Trek convention in Orlando. And Lieutenant Uhura had been someone that I had really enjoyed from the Star Trek series when I was a child. And so I really wanted to meet her. So I decided to go to Orlando, and Dr. Long went with me. And we had a great time in Orlando. Irene's a real big fan of Star Trek also, so we had a really enjoyable time. I've met Nichelle Nichols again since then, and I'm really impressed by Nichelle Nichols. She's a very, I don't know how you'd say, just exciting, enthusiastic woman who has just a lot of heart. At the time that she was playing the character of Lieutenant Uhura on Star Trek, there were not very many women in roles like that on television or in movies or anywhere. That is, someone who was self-reliant and very competent. She also helped NASA with recruitment of minorities and women back in 1977, 78, when they chose the first group of shuttle astronauts. And I'm just extremely impressed by her. I had a real interesting science experiment that had to do with goldfish, and we won't go into the whole part about it, but I had lots of cats, and the experiment had lots of goldfish, and sometimes the goldfish were in open containers, and I'd come in and the cat had sort of dipped the goldfish out of containers, and it's kind of fun. My parents were really neat because they'd buy me more goldfish. Well, the first launch that I saw was the launch of Discovery back in September of 1988, and that was the first launch since the Challenger accident. And I had been working down at Kennedy and had been working on this launch, and I don't think you can really describe the feeling. It's very moving. You know that you worked real hard on it. You know that the people who are involved in the whole process are very enthusiastic. I can't describe the feeling. I think you have to see one. It's just a feeling of tremendous, I guess, admiration, pride, enthusiasm. Definitely enthusiasm. I met Ron McNair once, but I did not know him very well. Ron spent time talking to me one day that I came down to NASA about the astronaut program and what was involved in his experiences with it. And this was when I was thinking about applying, and spent a lot of time with me. And this was and I was someone he had just met and who had, he consented to spend time talking to. And from everything I've heard, he was a very involved person. He spent time working with community groups and organizations. He's also extremely bright. I speak to different groups of people all over the country, folks who are interested in finding out what's going on with the astronaut program. And I have different messages for different groups. I guess the main thing I like to impress upon people, whether they're young or old, is that you have to be in charge of your own life and responsible for it. And it's important for you to deal with the world on terms that are good for you. A lot of times, people say, well, let's get the astronauts to talk to our young folks. I think our old folks need to know about the space program too, and need to understand what the benefits of it are, and need to also understand that they can continue to improve themselves. Right now, the space program, the decisions that are being made as to whether we're going to continue in space technology research are made by, quote unquote, the old folks, not the young folks. So unless we prepare our world to be a place that the children who are growing up today can readily step into, we're not going to be setting things up well for them. So even if they do really want to be involved in the space program, or want to be involved in science, or want to be involved in world issues, if we haven't laid the groundwork, then they're not going to be able to do that.